It's crazy that what we've been talking about here on the channel for years is now even being confirmed by Reuters. Central banks are dumping the US dollar and are ready for alternatives. China is even preparing for a new world currency and is ready for the dollar collapse. And who will be the successor? Could it be Bitcoin? The Robinhood CEO now says in an interview that Bitcoin will shake up and replace the traditional financial world. Bitwise is making a new 22 trillion Bitcoin price prediction. Max Kaiser says that a supply shock is imminent. Of course, that makes sense. If more and more people recognize the power of Bitcoin, and more central banks, more people, more big players are dumping the US dollar, then obviously you need alternatives. We're looking at the latest reports here from the People's Bank of China, the Chinese central bank, which is now ready for a new world reserve currency. Ray Dalio has always said it, currencies die and others are born anew. Are we witnessing the 100-year currency cycle that's now breaking? We're also looking at this chart here, which is one of the most relevant charts and fits the new headlines. The US dollar is collapsing and Bitcoin is on the rise. But first, let's leave a like down below so that Bitcoin can become the new world reserve currency. We've already seen several people talk about this, and of course, that's the grand vision for Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't just, an asset or some weird internet thing. No, Bitcoin could actually become the new world reserve currency. And take a look at this. Ray Dalio has already laid it out here as clearly as anyone possibly could. That means here we have these 100 to 120-year cycles. First, we had the Dutch here who provided the world reserve currency, then the British, the USA, and now China is rising up down here. And there is always a transition phase of 10 to 20 years where things shift, where there are civil wars, revolutions, currency resets, and so on. And right now, we are exactly in that transition phase, in the critical phase. That's why the likelihood of war is also increasing, along with many other things, which of course are unpleasant. But this is, of course, the bearish scenario where China becomes the new world reserve currency. That's Ray Dalio's base case. Personally, I would prefer the base case where Bitcoin is on the rise and Bitcoin replaces the US dollar, or perhaps Bitcoin could even extend the US dollar's dominance a bit, and we see a kind of Bitcoin dollar system. And these statements fit right in. The head of the People's Bank of China envisions a new world currency order after the dollar era. So he's actually giving a speech now talking about this or publishing, hey, the dollar is going to collapse and there could potentially be other successors. I'm always very unsure about the theory that China will now provide the new world reserve currency, because actually they wouldn't really be interested in having such a strong currency. They actually benefit, at least in part, from the weak currency they have in China. And China, yes, is of course somewhat on the rise, but on the other hand, they also have their problems. They also don't have a super great, demographics and a lot of other issues, but there is definitely a clear trend toward de-dollarization. That means more and more people are relying on other currencies, and fewer people are holding dollar reserves in central banks. And now there's this very explosive report from Reuters. Central banks, which manage reserves worth trillions, are planning to reduce their dollar holdings and increase their exposure to gold, euros, and Chinese yuan, indicating a shift due to rising geopolitical tensions. Bitcoin was created for this very moment, the escape from the dollar. And that's a prediction I've been making for a very long time, long before these reports started coming out. I've always said, hey, the next Bitcoin cycles, whether it's this cycle or the next one, will definitely be massively driven as well. Not because people just want to get a lumbo here, number go up. No, it's the flight from dying fiat currencies that will bring people to Bitcoin. The flight from the dollar will bring people to Bitcoin. And of course, some will also flow into gold, some into, say, the yuan or wherever else, whatever. Maybe even into Picasso's or artworks or whatever. Maybe people buy themselves some hydrangeas here, or here we've got a bit of dandelion going on. Of course, that's not exactly a great store of value, but maybe it's still better to enjoy some dandelion now and then than to hold too many dollars. By the way, thumbs up for dandelion if you didn't know that. Dandelion is one of the most resilient plants ever. It has such an insane, root structure that you can hardly destroy it. And that's the parallel to Bitcoin. Check out this ultimate super plant, which also has massive healing powers and much more. And it's no different with Bitcoin. No matter how many times people try to fight Bitcoin, you just can't destroy it. And I always crack up when I see some grannies or whoever, or just people in the garden spending their whole day fighting dandelions. It's just like the central bankers who spend all day fighting against Bitcoin. I don't think there's a better comparison than the Bitcoin dandelion analogy. And the question is also whether the Chinese will realize that Bitcoin could potentially become the new world reserve currency, because they've already figured out that the dollar won't be it anymore. And then we have the other central banks. Where are they? The other central banks catching on to all of this, like the Russian central bank. They're realizing okay, the dollar isn't going to be it anymore. But the question is whether they can put two and two together and come to the conclusion, hey, let's go with Bitcoin and not fall for the next fiat scam. And what's also really, really interesting here in this context, Russia has already made its first attempt to introduce Bitbonds through Sberbank. And now there's another exciting new report that, 14 trillion US dollars. The Moscow exchange is considering offering investment funds and structured bonds related to Bitcoin. The global financial world is embracing Bitcoin here, right? And what's really interesting about this is, as it sounds here, structured bonds is what they're calling it. So, structured bonds in connection with Bitcoin. That's basically nothing other than a Bitbond, if you ask me. And it's just a fascinating dynamic when both of these things come together here. Bitcoin, the traditional financial world's central banks. In the Czech Republic, there are already some approaches showing openness to Bitcoin. And we're really, really curious to see what happens because now there have been some very strong statements about this. If we assume, okay, the dollar is weakening, Bitcoin could be a potential candidate here, then it's only a matter of time before central banks realize that Bitcoin is the right path or that Bitcoin has this massive power here. And now we have an interview here with the Robinhood CEO who basically talks about exactly this. He says here that cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, will completely replace the traditional financial world, just like Jack Dorsey as well. Jack Dorsey also said, no, Bitcoin won't just improve the traditional financial system, it will completely replace it. And now we really have the next big CNBC interview where exactly this statement is being dropped. And that would also fit with the thesis here from all the Bitcoiners who simply say, no, it's not the yuan that's going to become the new world reserve currency, but simply Bitcoin.
I do think that crypto itself, there's two ways to look at it. One is a tradable asset like options, futures, equities. The other is as a fundamental underlying technology.
Das ist schon mal sehr, sehr wichtig. Das gehört ja auch. You can either see it as an asset, like, okay, I'll get myself some Bitcoin and maybe I'll get rich from it or something, or you see it as a fundamental technology, like the internet, gunpowder, the automobile, the smartphone, and many other things. And if you see Bitcoin as a technology, then you also realize that Bitcoin is much more than just a number go up machine.
Lens, it's the next stage in evolution. We've gone from, paper and pencil, filing cabinet-based financial services to mainframe to on-premise, and then more recently cloud. Now crypto is the next stage in that.
Habt ihr das gehört? Bitcoin or the next stage of evolution. That means we had paper. Back then, maybe we used shells as money. Then somehow we got to the cloud, and now Bitcoin is here. I mean, he always mixes up Bitcoin and crypto a bit because it's not crypto that's the next stage of the revolution here. It's really about Bitcoin, at least if we assume here that we're talking about achieving world reserve status. So, of course, he's not talking directly about world reserve status right now, but that's what we're discussing here in this video. That means I really see Bitcoin as the big revolution here. The crypto space might still bring some cool innovations and so on. But for now, the fact is that Bitcoin is simply the big revolution here. And crypto still has to prove itself in some ways, whether there really are those cool use cases that are often promised.
A lot of the business logic that we've required businesses to actually build is now shared infrastructure. So exchanges, lending pools, payment processors, all these things are replaced by software. So I think in the future, crypto technology will power trading and all sorts of financial services, including trading in stocks and in other TradFi assets. So the two will fully merge.
Here it's described again, and now I've got this awesome dandelion leaf. Go ahead and drop a like for the dandelion leaf. Pretty cool to show off. It's described again here. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will replace traditional finance. At the very least, they'll merge, as he says here. But you could also interpret it as saying that it will basically replace everything completely. Feel free to drop your takes down below. So, I see it the same way. In the long run, this will basically replace all that old school stuff, because why wouldn't it if you think about it? These days, nobody rides around on the street on a horse anymore. They all drive cars. Or nobody uses smoke signals anymore. They all use smartphones. Or nobody uses carrier pigeons anymore. They all use the internet. So I'd say technology really is disruptive. And why shouldn't that be the case with Bitcoin? Why would anyone still use any of that old school TradFi stuff in 10 years when you could just use Bitcoin? And the asset manager Bitwise has more or less confirmed this as well. In a new interview, if you listen closely, you can hear it clearly.
You guys had a bonus prediction, which that in 2029, Bitcoin would overtake the $18 trillion gold market and trade above 1 million per Bitcoin. You still feeling good about this?
Feel great about this. And I actually will do you one better is that at the time when we released this prediction, the market cap of gold was around 18 trillion. And so we took a step back and we said, look, we see all of this adoption happening at the government level, at the corporation level, at the institutional investor level, across many different investor types. And so what do we think that's going to do for the price of Bitcoin? We said, well, look, it's a digital version of gold, many people say, but we actually think the addressable market's much larger than that for Bitcoin, payments, remittances, a number of other interesting use cases. And so we by 29, we do think that Bitcoin will hit parity with gold. But this, again, $1 million target was when price of gold was at 18 trillion from a market cap perspective. Today, that's 20% higher.
They've even raised their price prediction again because, of course, gold keeps going up as well. And naturally, if Bitcoin is going to reach parity with gold, then the price target also has to keep being adjusted upwards, since gold's market capitalization is also rising. And he also says Bitcoin can do everything, not just translate, but replace, at least partially, things like cross-border payments, remittance payments. Basically, the whole payment system can be improved with it. I mean, payments are still tricky. Some of the payment infrastructure still works reasonably well, you have to admit, in the fiat system. But especially when it comes to the store of value aspect. And yeah, once Bitcoin has caught up with gold or even surpassed it, I don't see any reason why Bitcoin couldn't massively outpace gold, or even take on the bond market, the real estate market, and much more. But feel free to write your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know how you see it. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link for you. Bitcoin can be bought easily and securely. And with the code Bitcoin, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you next time. Peace out.